kick off now then. So welcome to the latest episode of the Transport for the North podcast. My name is James Barber and I'm the host, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Emma Orthlick, who is our Principal Economics Officer, and David Worsley, who is our Rail Strategy Manager. Today we're going to be discussing our latest piece of work around rail accessibility. So we've launched a survey which has gone out recently to discuss how we can better transform the North rail stations and make them accessible for all. So given that's one of our principal aims, David, do you want to just give us a quick introduction into what the survey is about, how it's come into sort of fruition?
Yes, our political leadership were originally very concerned about the question of step-free access to all railway stations. So in our area, we've got about 600 stations that we're interested in, and whichever way you measured it, we thought that about half of them were not fully accessible to wheelchair users or other people who might have difficulty using stairs. So that was quite a big problem. If half our stations aren't accessible to a certain group of passengers. But when we started looking at the data about what facilities existed for stations and so on, we found that quite a lot of stations were missing customer information systems, which of course isn't very good for people with hearing impairments who rely on that. Other ones were missing public address systems, which of course aren't very good for people with visual impairments. And then more recently, I found out there's quite a lot of new high technology equipment that can be used to boost accessibility for different groups. So there's things such as what we call smart beacons, which send out Bluetooth signals that people with enabled mobile phones can pick up and give them information about the station. And there's some really new exciting developments, such as signs which give messages in British Sign Language, which is the only way that some people can communicate. So there's a whole host of new things that we can be doing to improve accessibility at stations for all our passengers. And this survey is a really good opportunity to get actual feedback from the passengers on how they experience the stations.
Is there particular areas where the issues are worse? Or what kind of stations are we looking at, would you say, where the issues are potentially more severe?
Well, strangely enough, different patches of the North, the situation is different for different types of accessibility issue. So we know that Greater Manchester has a particular problem with step-free access. There's a lot of quite busy stations in the Greater Manchester area, such as Levenshume or Handforth, which is obviously just outside Greater Manchester in Cheshire, just about a mile outside, where there's a lot of steps at the moment, and those stations are not really accessible to wheelchair users. Now, actually, Network Rail have got the programme to sort those two stations out. But in general, Greater Manchester's pretty poor for step-free access. In other parts of the country, it's more security type issues, which we think could be putting people off travelling by rail. So, for example, in North Yorkshire or Humberside, there's poor coverage of CCTV at stations, and we think that might be making people feel a bit unsafe, particularly in remote areas. So that's one of the issues we want to address in that area. Actually, we've produced maps that have gone out with the survey that show that these sorts of things are different in different patches. So every county sort of has its own problem, really.
Emma, just to bring you in. So Emma, you lead our Northern Transport Voices, which is effectively a forum where people across the region can come together and discuss their particular issues and give us the feedback. What sort of feedback have we had through that in the lead up to this, and sort of especially what are the particular issues that we've heard from the forum, the Northern Transport Voices, around the accessibility issues, and what types of people are most affected by it, would you say, from the evidence that you've built up?
Yeah, so we started off by carrying some research with Northern Transport Voices, which is Transport for the North's online research community, which brings people from all over the North to discuss transport issues. And with our research community, we collected some initial feedback on rail station accessibility, asking about passengers' experience at different stages of completing a journey, so from arriving to the rail station, from their experience inside the station, and then boarding the train as well for their onward travel. The kinds of feedback that we've been getting so far very much relate to physical accessibility challenges, so things like lacks of lifts or ramps that provide that step-free access in a station. And in particular, we've been hearing from passengers who perhaps have to travel further to get to an accessible station, or have to go past their intended destination to get to an accessible station where they can actually disembark and use that station. So people are having to extend their journey for longer because perhaps their local home-based station is not accessible to them. But we've also been getting some feedback from passengers who are telling us that certain stations may be advertised as step-free access or friendly to people who have disabilities or reduced mobility, but in practice, in reality, there are still some issues that they're experiencing there. And another issue that passengers are telling us about is that feeling of a lack of personal safety as well, which we also consider an important aspect of making a station accessible to everyone and comfortable and welcoming for everyone to use as well.
Absolutely, and obviously as part of our mission at Transport for the North to transform our region, we want to encourage that modal shift, getting more people onto public transport, and it's becoming quite clear, especially through all of the evidence base that we've built up, that a lot of more vulnerable people, disabled people, etc., are not feeling able or comfortable to use the railways. So would you say that the feedback we're getting is that more people would use our railways if they're made more accessible at the station points?
Absolutely. That's something that we've already heard from some of the feedback that we've received from rail users, is that they would very much like to use the station in their hometown. If it was made more accessible, they would use it more often. They would use it for different types of journeys, potentially. Potentially they would be less dependent on their private car or taxis. Or other forms of transport if that rail connectivity and accessibility was improved for them. And in fact, research carried out nationally by Transport for All has found that people who experience a long-term disability or a physical or mental health condition tend to make around 5 trips by rail per year on average, compared to around 20 taken by people who don't have a disability or a long-term health condition. So you can really see how that lack of accessibility is a barrier for many people, and there is a lot of potential for our railways to be used by many more people if we can make them more accessible.
Absolutely, and you mentioned Transport for All. They're obviously a national charity working towards an accessible railway network for everyone, and it is about making sure that everyone has those equal opportunities to access public transport, which is at the heart of everything we're doing with the survey. So just to move on then, obviously we have the survey. What sort of dictates the timescales of how the outcomes come out of this? What sort of outcomes are we looking at?
At the moment, I'm building up a business case really for a programme of investment in the North stations, which will be looking at quantifying the benefits, how many people we think will have an easier journey because of the sorts of improvements that we're planning to bring in. And so the outputs from the survey will feed into that document. And I'll be able in particular, I think, to focus in on the safety aspect, which is something that we've often suspected as a reason why lots of people don't travel by rail, but there hasn't been a great deal of hard data to support that in the past. So that's part of the survey that I'll be really interested in. We do have quite a lot of research from the past that shows us how many more people you might expect to travel if you have good customer information systems, good CCTV security and lighting and things like that. There has been research done on that in the past, but the impact of just making things more easy for people with mobility impairments, and also generally improving the sense of safety. We haven't got so much data about that, so I'm really looking forward to getting that sort of information from the survey.
Fantastic. And Emma?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with David. The feedback that we'll get from the survey will be really important for us for understanding how passengers are experiencing accessibility at different stations. It will allow us to see passengers' priorities and what improvements people would like to see implemented, so that we can use that to enhance our business cases and make sure that we're delivering the best possible outcomes for our passengers.
Yeah, and last year we had obviously the ticket office closures and consultation. Do you think that sort of brought this issue to the forefront of the public's mind? Because I know a lot of the feedback that came out of that, especially around sort of the safety elements. So was that sort of, would you say, the starting gun for this bigger, wider conversation around accessibility?
Yes, I think that was very useful to us, because it showed the strength of feeling that there was there about railway stations and people's feelings about travelling by train. And one of the things that would have happened if those ticket office closures had gone ahead would be that the proportion of journeys in the north which would have had staff at both ends of the journey, at the stations at both ends of the journey, would have fallen from about 75% of journeys to only 20% of journeys would people have had members of staff at both ends. And obviously having staff there does help increase people's feeling of safety and security. So that could have been a bad impact, I think, if that had happened.
Absolutely, and we've seen through a lot of the buy-in we've had from our board members that there's a lot of different sort of focuses. So obviously Mayor Braben over in West Yorkshire does a lot of work on the safety of women and girls, and I think that sort of safety with the accessibility of railway stations is quite important to a lot of people. Equally, Mayor Burnham, obviously, who chairs Rail North Committee, he's looking into that disabled elements and the wider picture. So what sort of element of support do you think that brings in, adding this sort of credibility and momentum behind the survey?
Well, I think it's definitely very helpful to get the political big hitters on board, because in the end we are going to need some sort of investment to rectify these problems. And a lot of that is because for the step-free access, because if you want to put in good lifts and ramps for people, sometimes you need to do a bit of earthworks, what we call geotechnical works around it to flatten out areas which are a bit hilly, which we often have in the north, stations built on embankments or in cuttings. So there's potentially quite a lot of investment we need, but also although that might take a longer period of time, sort of looking 6, 7, 8, 9 years ahead to do some of that sort of work, really, with the planning timescales we have. There are also a lot of things that can be done quite quickly, and we think maybe 3, 4, 5 years into the future, because they're not so disruptive for passengers. And this is some of the high technology and enhancements I was talking about, and also just better customer information screens and so on. And they tend to be a lot cheaper, and they can be done more quickly. And if we can get political support for them, we can get them on the national agenda and hopefully get funding for them.
Absolutely. You've mentioned the figure of 1.5 billion, which is obviously a very large figure there. But Emma, as our principal economics officer, you obviously do a lot of work on sort of those economic benefits that will come out of that. And whilst it seems like a big figure to spend a lot of money, the economic benefits that it would bring and also the social benefits outweigh that figure. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the kind of long-term period, you would see that investment more than pay off in terms of the wider economic and social benefits that it would bring to our society, and that's really through things like connecting people to opportunities, not just in terms of things like work or education, but also connecting them to essential services such as healthcare, but also connecting people to social opportunities, which are really important. And we've had a lot of feedback through the survey already from people saying that they feel more lonely or more isolated as a result of not being able to use that rail connection in their area to get to see friends and family. So the social benefits are huge. And not to forget also the potential environmental benefits from increased use of rail and potentially decreased use of private vehicles. The decarbonisation benefits are potentially huge there as well.
Absolutely. So, sort of the next steps then, the survey's obviously open until June. What happens after that? How will TFN sort of use that feedback from the survey to ensure that the views and inputs, experiences of the different people across the region are actually factored into ensuring that we improve our infrastructure?
Well, I'm looking at getting a station strategy document together by the middle of July, probably, which will incorporate all this sort of information about what the survey said about how people currently experience stations in the north, and therefore reinforce our case for improving them. And after that, we're in touch with our partners, which are not just the local transport authorities and mayoral combined authorities, but Network Rail and the train operating companies as well. And I'm currently in talks with the train operating companies and Network Rail and TFGM in particular, who've got a lot of experience of trying to improve the stations, looking at the what we call the deliverability issues. How practical will it be to get these things done within 10 years? What sort of things do we need to start thinking about? Which risks do we need to mitigate in order to be able to move forward some sort of programme of investment? So it'll be an ongoing thing even after the station strategy documents brought together.
Fantastic. So obviously some real outcomes that we're seeking to implement and ensuring that the voices of the residents across the north is listened to. So the final point sort of is, how do we spread the word about the survey and get everyone to take part? So Emma, obviously through Northern Transport Voice, you've done a lot of work about that, but in terms of the wider public, how would you say we go about that as best as possible?
I think it's just a case of spreading the word amongst our partners and through our communications channels. One of the nice things about the survey is that we actually would encourage people to complete it more than once if they like. So we ask people when they complete the survey to focus on a particular station, whether that's the station nearest to their home, or the one that they use the most often, or perhaps even the one that they feel requires the most improvement. But if they would like to give us feedback on more than one station, people can complete the survey more than once, and they can also pass on the link to the survey to their friends and family as well, who might be particularly impacted by accessibility issues. So we would encourage our rail users across the north to share the survey with anyone they think might have an interest and will be able to contribute their feedback to us.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So that draws us to the end, and thank you both for this, all the work that's gone into this, because it is a massively important part of what we want to do at TFN, ensuring that everyone is able to access our railways in an accessible and safe manner. So the survey closes on the 7th of June, I believe, and
yes,
so you've got some time left to get involved. And as Emma said, please share it with your friends. Make sure you fill it in for as many stations as you feel you're able to, because the more evidence we can get, that means the more change we can instigate. So that's fantastic. And again, thank you, Emma and David, for coming on to the podcast today and discussing the work that you're leading with us. So the survey can be found on Transport for the North website at www.transportforthenorth.com, and then we look forward to hearing as many responses as we can get. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast today, and we look forward to you joining us next time.